Okay, Doug, I want to talk about the deep state today. In 2015, you wrote, "The deep state is an extremely powerful network that controls nearly everything around you. You won't read about it in the news because it controls the news. Politicians won't talk about it publicly. That would be like a mobster discussing murder and robbery on the 6 o'clock news. You could say the deep state is hidden, but it's only hidden in plain sight. The deep state is the source of every negative thing that's happening right now, and to survive the coming rough times, it's essential for you to know what it's all about." Has your view changed since 2015?
No, actually, the deep state has actually gotten much more powerful since then. Uh, I think I think we should discuss where it came from
Mm,
and what it is. Look, first of all, as I mentioned yesterday, as an anarcho-capitalist, I don't believe in the state itself as an institution. Uh, we need order in society, uh, like like most anarchists. I believe in society. I believe in order. I believe in law, natural law. I just don't believe in coercion. And the state itself is institutionalized coercion. Basically, you do what, it doesn't matter if it's a so-called democracy or a so-called republic or a dictatorship, it doesn't matter. You don't do what the state tells you to do. They'll hold a gun to your head and they'll either put you in jail or they'll kill you. I
mm.
mean, so that's what the state itself is all about. Now, what's the deep state? The deep state are essentially cronies that live off of the institution of the state, use it to enrich themselves and to empower themselves. And uh, the powers that be in the US, the media say the deep state, that doesn't exist. This is more conspiracy theory. Well, this is actually beyond ridiculous. It's actually stupid that they would say that, and they know better. Um, it's not a formal organization. It's not all about some guy that runs the deep state that's stroking his white cat. That's not what it's about. Members of the deep state, and I'll talk about how we can subdivide these people in the country according to this analysis in a moment. But people that can be said to be part of the deep state, the top levels of it, I call them top dogs. They generally have gone to the same schools. They generally work for the government or big corporations or big universities or NGOs. They share values is the important thing. But more important than that even is that they all live off the state itself, but very informally. And when you share values with people, you don't have to go and collude together. Yes, things like the Bohemian Grove and Davos and the Council on Foreign Relations, those things are packed with top dogs in the deep state. But they don't need that to collude. It's a question of people that recognize where their interests are, and one hand washes the other. They scratch each other's backs. So that's what the deep state is about. And they love things to stay the way they are, more or less, because they become more rich. For ones that like being famous, they become more famous. And they all like being powerful. So they become more powerful too. So it's a very informal organization. There are no membership cards to the deep state club, in other words.
Mm. Do you
So
think that they recognize, the people that are in the deep state recognize that they're part of something that people could reasonably describe as the deep state, or are they just so much in shared values and shared interests that they're even blind to it? You know, I mean,
well, that's a good question. Birds of a feather flock together in many ways throughout society, throughout human society. And when it comes to to quote another hackneyed aphorism, one girl tells another, tells another, tells another.
mm,
And if somebody is rising up and becoming rich and powerful, other rich and powerful people want to get to know who this new force, this new kid on the block is. So they all get to know each other eventually. So how do I break down the deep state? Who are the real movers and shakers in the so-called deep state? Well, it's absolutely top senators and top congressmen, not the bit players in those organizations, but the power movers. They're deep state guys. In the US government, and it goes far beyond the US government. So you've got those guys, you've got the heads of top agencies, absolutely. The NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the DEA, powerful agencies like that, State Department, these guys in the government. You've got top generals and admirals, as well as heads and people that are near the top of the Praetorian agencies. And I suppose it can go down to as low as a well-connected colonel, like Ollie North, for instance, who was an up-and-comer that was subsequently inducted. Okay, so that basically takes care of the US government. But the deep state then goes to top universities, where the presidents and deans of the universities are usually deep state. If it's a major university, some podunk college, forget about it. Nobody knows, nobody cares. I'm talking the Ivy League schools and big ones, University of California, University of Illinois, things like that. Okay, and the universities are important because they act as recruiting venues for the deep state. I remember when I was a salesman, for instance, I had the misfortune to misallocate 4 years of my time and a bunch of money going to Georgetown University for 4 years. And the top guys in Georgetown are all deep staters because it's in Washington, D.C., and it's got a school of foreign service and all that. But anyway, I was a salesman, and I set up an appointment for an insurance company. I set up an appointment with the dean of George Washington University, which is just down the block from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. proper. And we got along well, and my rap as an insurance salesman was quite good, and he was impressed. And he says, you know what? What you might want to do is I can set up an interview for you with the FBI, and you might want to look at that as a new career. And I said, that's interesting. Well, what's this guy? Obviously, he's recruiting for the FBI, something that he does with his students and God knows what other government agency. So, okay, top universities full of deep state guys. NGOs have become very, very big and popular in recent years. These are basically 501c3 type organizations where you can give them money tax-free, and then they use the money for charitable, scientific, and this type of thing. And the big ones are all connected with the deep state because you control a bunch of money and you have credibility. So that's absolutely the case. So NGOs, very suspicious of them for that reason. Heads of top corporations, absolutely. I'm not just talking about Google and Facebook and things like that, but all the big corporations, the top guys that run it are members of the deep state. And this is informal. Remember, this isn't, they don't all get together and collude. They can't collude formally because when you've got several thousand and at the top level of the deep state, the top dogs, there's several thousand people that, could be said to be members of it. Look, it's hard enough to get a couple of friends to decide what movie to see at night. Getting professional miscreants and malefactors to agree on anything is really, really hard. But they all share interests. And as cronies, which is basically what it is, I mean, the state that we have right now in the United States is not capitalism. Far from it. It's the kindest thing I can say about our current economic system in this country is it's crony capitalism, where everybody uses the state as a trough to slop in or a tit to suck on. That's the kind of capitalism that we have today. It's
What's the least kind version? What's the least kind name of this form of capitalism we have?
well, technically speaking, from it's fascism is actually what it's about. And here we have to talk about, well, what is capitalism? Capitalism is totally unfettered, people buying and selling and with each other, unregulated, untaxed, totally free market, where the way you succeed is by providing things that other people are willing to buy voluntarily.
Right.
Very simple. It's natural. Capitalism is completely natural. Fascism, however, is confused with capitalism. Fascism, incidentally, has nothing to do with black uniforms and jackboots and swastikas. Nothing to do with that at all. Those are just artificial appurtenances that had to do with the fact that Germany under Hitler was an economic fascist state, just like Italy under Mussolini. And fascism was a term that was originated by Mussolini because, of course, he wanted to reconstitute the old Roman Empire. Fascism, fasces were a bunch of rods that were tied together with an axe coming from them. We see it, look at the back of a mercury dime, which we had for 40 years made out of silver. Fasces. Look at Lincoln, Lincoln's, the chair that Lincoln sits in the memorial. A couple of fasces with the axe coming out of it. So what's the meaning of the fasces from that point of view? It's that the rods are tied together, give you strength. One rod, it's not so strong. A bunch of rods tied together, very strong. And the axe coming out is a way of punishing people that don't play the game. That's really where it comes from.
Wow.
It's from ancient Rome, fascism. Well, how does this work? Okay, getting back to what we're talking about here. Fascism in capitalism, let's use a Marxist analysis. This makes it easy. Marx divided all goods into two categories: means of production or consumer goods. Okay, means of production create new wealth. Consumer goods are just things you want, need to live, but they don't create more wealth. So in capitalism, all consumer goods and all means of production are privately owned and privately controlled. In fascism, and this is where people get confused, a subtle difference, is that the means of production are basically all privately owned, but they are all state controlled. That's the difference. State controlled meaning regulated and taxed and dependent upon grants from the government and this type of thing. The next step down is socialism, another word which is confused, and very few people know how to define this thing. Marxist analysis, again, it's where the means of production are controlled by the state in all ways, but consumer goods are not. Well, this is like the Scandinavian countries. Well, they're not socialist at all. They're fascist from this point of view. Do we have any real socialist states left in the world anymore? Even China, you know, when I mentioned China last night as not being a communist country, it's not from a Marxist analysis. That's not to say it's not an authoritarian country, very different. So I don't want people to get confused when I say that. So socialism means a production owned by the state, consumer goods owned by individuals. You can have your own car, have your own house, you know, no problem. Communism, well, that's where everything is held in common. Not just the means of production, but your house, your car. Theoretically, I mean, it's everything. So there's never been a pure communist society, not even very many successful socialist societies. Most of the economies in the world are fascist.
Mm.
Or there aren't any capitalist societies.
I'm glad I got you to talk about
Okay.
this, but I did take you way off topic from deep state. So basically, you said our economy is much more. It's crony capitalism is the nicest thing you say about it. Fascist is more accurate, but not kind, but accurate. And then you were basically talking about we're talking about these top dogs that are throughout the entire, from education to NGOs to government offices to elected office and so forth. So where were we going after that? We're going to talk about there's the top dogs, but then there's this whole other group.
Yeah, that's right. Because how many people are really powerful in the deep state? They've got power, prestige, money. I wouldn't even know how to guess how many members of this informal group, they kind of know who each other are, just like people in every business or social strata kind of know who their peers are. I'll guess in the United States, 2,500 guys might be classed as top dogs. But then underneath them, you've got what I would call running dogs. And these are people that would like to be a top dog, but are basically lick spittles to the top dogs. They're all kinds of mid-managers and so forth that need the state, that live off the state. Well, for instance, how many government employees do we have in the US? People that work for the government, state, local, national. I think the number is 23 million. We can total number of government employees in the US. Let's check that. I may be wrong. So, those might be called running dogs. They want things to continue existing the way they are and grow in.
So these guys are actually in. So the deep state the deep state's one of the basic ideas behind it is that they are actually in control. So who you elect for president doesn't even really matter that much, and because the people that are there for the long term, for the duration, are really the people that are in charge.
Yeah, that's right. Look at you have a choice in the U.S. between voting for the right wing or the left wing of the Demopublican Party. So you get your choice between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Bill Clinton, deep state. Bob Dole, old and tired, deep state. Mitt Romney, total deep state. So you get to choose between one flavor and another. But in both cases, you're eating, I hate to say ice cream, but because that's, wholesome and tasty. But they're just flavors of statism.
Yeah.
People are put up for president. That's why they hate Trump so much. All the problems that I have with Trump, I guess everybody's got problems with Trump. One thing you can say about him is he should be a member of the deep state, but he wants to break their, funny thing about Trump is you like him, he tends to like you. You hate him, he hates you. Well, that's fine, since all the people that hate him are uniformly deep state. And also the media, they're the guys that run these big corporations are deep state, and Hollywood, which is able to get ideas out there, much the way the educational system does. They're all deep state with the same interests too. But okay, so you've got all these running dogs underneath that cater to the deep state and like things the way they are. And then the vast majority of people in the country are what I call whip dogs. They don't have any power. They don't have any prestige. They don't have any money. So who are they? Well, let's see. There's about 60 million people on Social Security. they're kind of like the lumpen proletariat. There's like 65 million. I'm pulling this out of my head because these are kind of interesting numbers. They're big. Say 65 million people that are on Medicaid that have even today, forget about Obamacare or whatever, that has the government pay their medical bills. People that are working in low-level jobs that are indoctrinated, that do as they're told. Those are the whip dogs, and they know that if they don't roll over on their back and say yes sir and no ma'am when they're supposed to be subservient and wet themselves. The Romans called them the capitacensi. The Greeks called them the hoi polloi. The communists called them the masses. So that's the way I break it down. But, well, how do I fit myself into this, or you for that matter, or perhaps
where would you put us?
Our listeners? Well, I'm not a member of the deep state. They wouldn't have me. Like Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't join any club that would have me as a member. So forget about top dog, running dog, whip dog. Actually, I'm kind of a lone wolf. And that sounds good, but it's actually kind of dangerous and inconvenient to be a lone wolf because dogs, or let's say most of the 99% of the US, they don't like wolves. They're threatened by them, they're inconvenienced by them, and they will hunt down wolves very effectively. So it's sounds romantic to be a lone wolf, but it's actually not a very good card to play. So that's how I'd fit myself into this sort of thing.
Yeah, it seems like talk about hunting people down. I mean, it does seem like the some of the things that were related to Black Lives Matter and Antifa. It seemed like there were these like these almost struggle sessions that are going on to just identify who might be making sure you're a whip dog versus being a lone wolf. And if you're a lone wolf, then this it's basically maybe a confrontation that escalates into a struggle session when they realize that you might actually be a lone wolf, trying to get you to submit.
Yeah, that's right. And then they will organize and camp out in front of your house, or they'll attack you on the street, or they'll deplatform you in the media, things like that.
Right, and those are these are the people that are really doing that. At the street level, those are basically whipped dogs by your categorization, though, right? Those wouldn't be for the most part, the running dogs, and certainly not the top dogs that'd be out there doing that individual level of harassment. It's the masses.
Yeah, like an example of the in the media, top dogs, guys that own and control the media corporations or their major divisions. Running dogs are the talking heads that sit there and opine on things, and the whip dogs are the kind of people that listen to Oprah and consider her kind of a god.
Right. Yeah, that's good. So what do you think of why? I mean, if Trump is, really was confronting the deep state, really their enemy, and, he was going after them. I mean, he talks about clearing out the swamp years ago, but it seems like he's been totally unsuccessful in doing any of this. I mean, they nearly, as he said in the debate the other night, they tried to run a coup on him. More and more information is getting sort of just coming out very slowly. It seems like this information about the conspiracy against at least General Flynn, like this stuff should have been out there a long time ago, but it's held secret, and it's like he can't do anything about it at all.
No, you can't. I mean, when Ron Paul last ran for president, and I personally like and completely support Ron Paul, very, very decent and solid guy in all ways.
Yep.
But the last time he ran, I wrote an article saying that, look, I hope he wins, but it's not going to do anything, because what's going to happen is he's going to have a sit down with a bunch of these top dogs in the government, generals and heads of the Praetorian agencies. And they'll politely but firmly tell them the way things work. In other words, yeah, you can, go out and spew some rhetoric and make a few changes around the edges, but bad things will happen if you go beyond that. And assuming he doesn't bow to them or is somehow able to conduct a counter coup and demote all the generals in question and fire the heads of agencies in question, which is really hard to do. The next thing he'll find is he'll be impeached. And I said that in the article. And of course, that's what's happened to Trump. And then if he's going to really make some changes in society, and I would suggest you'd have to break a lot of people's doggy dishes, break their iron rice bowls. And if you try to do that, then people are going to go out into the streets and riot and, try to dethrone you. So even if Ron Paul had been elected, and even if he'd fought off a counter coup among the generals and agency heads, and you've seen who these people are against Trump, actually, as it turns out, you can't, they'll still try to impeach you. And so they're entrenched.
Yeah. And the weird thing is I've always complained, well, if these people are really going after him, why doesn't he fire them? And, but I was reading about how difficult it actually is to fire anybody. You mentioned this already at the high level of these bureaucracies. I mean, they are literally unfireable. You can't remove them. And specifically this article I was reading was talking about Fauci, who's basically been in charge of this agency for 50 years, or went in this agency for 50 years. He's 80 years old. So it's all these institutional people who've been, leading these organizations for so long, and they literally can't be removed. The most Trump could do is publicly rebuke them.
Yeah, these people share a worldview. They socialize with each other. They scratch each other's backs. They defend each other when they're under attack. That's what you do with people that are in your coterie. So yeah, it's extremely hard to get rid of them. Even if you have a violent revolution, it's hard to get rid of them. I mean, in the U.S., most of these government employees are almost guaranteed lifetime work under their civil service.
Right.
I mean, it's got to, they've got to do something absolutely obscene in order to get fired. So you can't get rid of them.
Yeah, I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was some civil service act from the late 70s that basically, if Trump thought that one of them were behaving totally inappropriately, like it really crossed the line, he could begin an administrative action, which would likely take years, to adjudicate essentially whether or not the person should be terminated. So yeah, it's really hard to run anything like that.
And God forbid that they're a member of a so-called minority or a female or gay or, then these people have further entrenched themselves with all kinds of laws. Right. So it's pretty hopeless right now to turn around the ship. The U.S. government is like a giant super tanker, and it doesn't matter who's president or anything. It takes a long time to get a super tanker up to cruising speed, and then to stop it takes a long time, and to turn it takes a long time. And right now, the U.S. super tanker is heading at flank speed towards a serious reef, and I don't know how we can stop it, quite frankly.
And yet you said, though, that this election is probably the most important, maybe in your lifetime or in a long time for the U.S. If the deep state's really in control, what does it matter?
Well, yeah, look, I always like to refer to the Roman Empire because we saw exactly how that played out. And, after a certain point, it was, you couldn't change what was going to happen. It was almost like the future history of the Roman Empire was written in stone. Like that movie Gladiator, it was about some noble senators were thinking of taking it back to being a republic again. Would have been totally impossible. Would have been totally impossible, even if Marcus Aurelius hadn't been assassinated and Commodus hadn't replaced him and so forth. I mean, there were just too many people that were invested in the way that things were, and the society itself was too corrupted. You had too many hundreds of thousands of people living on the dole in Rome. Okay, let's go back to a nice yeoman republic where we're all farmers and all believe in the founding principles of Rome. What are you going to do with several hundred thousand parasites living in Rome? You can't do anything with them. There they are. I mean, so it becomes too late. You can't do anything about the barbarians outside the border because they've been bumping up against Rome now for hundreds of years. They've garnered a lot of technology. They've gotten organized. And, you're so financially bankrupt, you can't pay the soldiers anymore. And you have to hire some barbarians to fight off other barbarians. And the way you hire them is by giving them pieces of land in the empire. So that's what happened in Rome. I hate to summarize, many hundreds of years of history in about one paragraph, but we're at that stage here in the US. I don't know. Look, I came up with a list of 7 things that I would do. People are like, well, okay, you're so smart. What would you do if you're president? What would you do to turn things around? Well, assuming I completely disregarded my personal safety, because the ideal thing when you have somebody that's viewed as a loose cannon in today's world is you just kill them, quite frankly. I mean, the US government does this all the time. What is that? They said that there were about what's the number? Was it 140 Arkancides to do with Clinton?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have no idea how factual that may be, but things like the suspicious death of Vince Foster and Ron Brown, I mean, these things absolutely stink. So I wouldn't want to be president if I wanted to keep living to start with, if I was going to do something radical like that. I'm surprised Trump is still alive, to be candid with you. But what could you do to turn around the United States at this point and destroy the deep state, which lives off the US government, the way a parasite does? Well, what are the 7 things? I'm not looking at a list of them right now. Do you have that in front of you? Because you sent me that.
Yeah, I could dig it up here. Just 1 second. Well, number 1, you say abolish or allow the collapse of all zombie corporation, banks, brokers, insurers, and government contractors.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can't abolish these corporations and banks.
No, well, I'm sorry. I meant allow the collapse of all zombie corporations.
Allow the collapse, yes. Yeah, absolutely. But they can't even do that at this point, because if the Federal Reserve at this point stopped printing money, most US banks would go bankrupt. Well, what's that mean? It means when you go down to your APM and you want some money, it's not there because the bank doesn't have it. Big corporations that have become dysfunctional, they shut their doors, the workers are unemployed, insurance company, the whole thing from top to bottom. The stock market crashes as a result. People don't get their pension fund payments. This is very much the situation that the Romans had at the time the empire was. What are you going to do when you've got 1 million people that are basically living off the dole in Rome? You're stuck. How do you change that? It's a force of their own. So as we're finding now, the US government can't allow the collapse of the banks, the insurance
Right.
companies, the pension funds, and all the rest of it. They
Mm.
can't. They're stuck. So what was this? So
Second
that's
one
what I'm
was,
trying to do, but it's impossible. What's the next thing?
all right. Second thing was abolish all regulatory agencies.
Yeah, things like these regulatory agencies, like the Securities and Exchange Commission and the EPA, the Environmental Protection, and OSHA, and how many of them? There's 100 of them.
Yeah, the FDA, the
FDA,
FTC.
yeah, right. I mean, they're theoretically and supposedly set up to protect the public. Well, that's just nonsense, actually. What they do is they protect the people that are already in the business from competition. Uh, so it becomes a question of you got a vicious dog after these things are established. Sometimes you can kick the dog, and sometimes the dog bites you. So who's really in control? And these agencies have all taken on lives of themselves, but they should all be abolished. I mean, look at the SEC, for instance. The actual cost of running it every year, paying its employees and the rest of it, a couple $1 billion. Well, a couple $1 billion. That's not even a rounding error anymore. But it's the damage that it does to the markets. And of course, it supports a gigantic coterie of securities lawyers who the last thing they want to see is the SEC abolished, because they'd serve no useful purpose. They'd have to go out and become garbage collectors or do something productive with their life. So the FDA, for instance, it kills more people every year than the Defense Department does in a typical decade. But people believe that they're protected by the FDA.
Right. There's a number of major blockbuster drugs that were, eventually had to be pulled off the market, which of course, to be on the market, they had to be FDA approved.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason I said it kills more people every year is because to have a new drug approved costs typically $1 billion or more and takes 10 years more than it would otherwise. So that's capital. That's $1 billion, which could be used productively to develop new drugs, as opposed to write papers and pay lawyers and so forth to get through the FDA's process. And in that 10 years when a drug might not be out there, how many people that could have been saved are killed? You say, well, somebody's got to protect people. Well, look, it's between you and your doctor, and to determine whether a drug should be used or shouldn't be used, there would be groups of doctors, and different groups would say different things. Well, of course, because how do you really know if any given drug is going to work for any given purpose? You don't. It's between you and your doctor on a strictly individual basis. And you'd find a doctor that is highly knowledgeable about these things, rather than a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter. Yeah, you can do it. No, you can't do it, from the bureaucrats in the FDA. And we can say the same thing about every single one of these agencies. So yeah, they all ought to be abolished. You can't do that though, because the average person will say, oh, I'm not safe anymore. Safety first. Can't abolish those things. That's not going to happen. It's got to happen. It will happen, but
the safety first culture is one of the most, probably one of the single most destructive trait that's sort of been adopted by the American public, I think, in my lifetime. I don't know if it was here before, but just this idea that safety first, safety matters more than everything else, is just crazy. It's so destructive.
It is. It must be why the sperm count of people in the West is collapsing, because they've all turned into, safety first namby-pambys.
Right, exactly. So your third thing was abolish the Fed.
Oh, absolutely. That's not going to happen either, but it's important because the money supply of a country, or the currency supply in this case, because the dollar isn't technically speaking money, it's a currency, which is different. If you abolish the Fed, the whole financial system would collapse at this point.
Hmm.
So it serves no useful purpose except by creating trillions of dollars now every year and directing them towards certain corporations, certain banks, or throwing some table scraps to the average hoi polloi in the form of these $1,200 checks that they send out and things like that. No, you can't do that because it serves no useful purpose. We should be using gold as money, just as a medium of exchange and a store of value. People would still produce and consume the same as they would otherwise, but you can't get rid of it at this point. You can't get rid of it until it totally destroys the US dollar. And then it won't exist anymore. And it and its thousands of overpaid employees, tens of thousands of overpaid employees, will have to find other work. But they'll set up a new one. Don't worry about that.
It seems like all these first three things sort of have to collapse on their own. You know, they just eventually they reach this point where they just cannot survive on their own and they just totally fail. The fourth one you said was cut the size of the military by 90%.
Yeah, I'd say cut the size of the military by 90% because the US military doesn't protect our freedom. What they're doing is running around the world annoying the locals. And the locals typically don't like to see American ships in their harbor bossing the local government around or American soldiers stationed in various places any more than we'd like to see Chinese soldiers here in the US or the Chinese fleet in Long Beach Harbor.
Yeah, I don't know why people have a hard time in just reversing the roles a little bit and understanding that how it could be problematic, how you might view it very poorly if the roles were reversed. For some reason, people never take the time to understand that. I don't get it.
In addition to the fact, as we talked about yesterday, I guess it's actually a major element in bankrupting the country. So, yeah, you can cut back the military, I suppose, but you know, Trump said he wanted to get out of Afghanistan and Iraq. I think he was sincere. You can see that it served no purpose, but he can't do it. I mean, okay, that's what we have to do, but it's not going to happen either. So what's the next one?
The next one, number 6, is eliminate the income tax.
Well, that might happen with modern monetary theory because the amount that they collect in taxes is becoming trivial relative to the amount that the Fed is creating and dispensing. So, yeah, that's possible. But then you'd have to adopt something like modern monetary theory, which would be even worse. So, could happen.
I want to talk about MMT tomorrow because I think that's a subject that is really misunderstood and deserves a lot more time on its own. So if we could save that.
But it would be wonderful. I mean, people would fight tooth and claw against that, though, too, because all the tax lawyers in the country, all the accountants in the country, I mean, you get rid of the income tax, they're going to have to do something productive with their time. So all kinds of people are going to fight about that. Even just making little changes around the edges in the way of reducing income tax is almost impossible today.
That's true. It seems like it's a fight to the death over small changes of rates and taxes. So yeah, eliminating it seems almost impossible.
People never think about actually getting rid of the whole thing and regaining 100%. You know, a slave is somebody who's basically taxed 100%. That's what a slave is. So, you know, the average American now is, depending on your tax bracket, I mean, everybody pays Social Security tax between you and your employer. It works out to close to 15%. And that's not tax deductible either. So everybody pays in between, say, 15 and 60% when you add in state taxes. So
the question is if you're a 15% slave or 60% slave.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that makes you a serf, doesn't it? Because
I guess
serfs
so.
are like a step up from a slave.
They are. The seventh one was default on the national debt and contingent liabilities.
Yeah, and of course, defaulting on a debt is quite correctly considered to be dishonorable, and it is. But we're talking about the US government. It's basically stolen money. And I'm for defaulting on the debt. I'm not just talking about the 28 or however many trillions it is now of official national debt, I'm talking about contingent liabilities and Social Security and all this type of thing, which are part of its debt. It probably adds up to $200 trillion of actual obligations the US government has. And the reason I say it should default is because if you don't default on it, it's going to turn future generations of Americans into indentured servants to pay that off. Some people are owed that money, but I'd like to see them punished, quite frankly, for having been complicit in financing the US government with all the stupid and destructive things it does. So, no, I don't care if they lose their money. And of course, you do that, it's going to bankrupt more pension funds and more banks. So, can you do it? Well, no, but it's going to be defaulted on as they destroy the dollar. That goes away. So, look, I'm basically saying, and well, maybe to make things easier, you can sell off all the US government's assets, like the national parks and so forth.
I forgot about that one. That was one of the ones I must have missed. Yes, that one was one that you had in here as well.
So, I mean, these things have actual market value, and the proceeds of that can be used to assuage the pain of some people that have been misled to count on the government, like that Social Security. I mean, people collecting it thought it was real, and not just a Ponzi scheme. So you got to help them out because they were misled. Mm-hmm. So that can be done, but none of this is going to happen. Although it's all going to happen eventually, because everything falls apart. That's what the second law of thermodynamics is all about, and that's one of the few laws I believe in. Over time, everything falls apart. And
It does. Well, so the deep state is strong and is obviously still flourishing, and regardless who's president, it's going to be there until it all eventually collapses on its own weight. That's the conclusion of this.
The deep state are these people that rely on the state itself, the government itself, and basically use the US government as their bitch. That's what it amounts to. So, I mean, I despise cronies, and cronies are that's another word for the deep state. But no, that's why when this comes to an end, it's going to be in a steaming, smoking mess. It's going to look like the collapse of the Roman Empire, or maybe the collapse of the French monarchy. I would have been all for getting rid of Louis XVI, but then it got worse. Or maybe like the collapse of Russia in 1917, I would have been all for getting rid of Nicholas II, except then they got Lenin, and then they got Stalin. So it usually gets worse when things collapse, because then it gives the scum the opportunity to rise to the top.
The running dogs finally get the role they want.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe they guillotine the old top dogs. So they can pump the new top dogs.
All right. Well, I think that's great for today. Thank you, Doug, for talking about this. And next time we're going to talk about modern monetary theory.
Yeah, it sounds like an intimidating and a boring subject, but if economic geniuses like AOC become more powerful after Biden wins, which I expect is going to happen, people are going to find out about modern monetary theory, whether they like it or not. So we might as well talk about it.
All right. We'll do that. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.